Mr. President.
Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I wanted to speak today about two separate topics. The first is Venezuela. Venezuela is a country in our hemisphere. It's in total crisis, total chaos. And it's because of a number of things: failed leadership, failed economic policies, a complete societal breakdown, human rights abuses, and now a de facto political coup that have plagued the country for about 15 years. This all started with Hugo Chavez and has now continued with Nicolás Maduro, his successor. Let's talk about the first cause of the disaster that's now befallen on the people of Venezuela: failed leadership. For over 15 years now, Venezuela has been ruled by two strongmen who have either mismanaged the country with an iron fist. They've squandered its vast wealth and natural resources. They've imprisoned political opponents. They've corrupted all of the country's political institutions to ignore the will of the people and to entrench their power. Failed leadership, by the way, that has only gotten worse because the successor to Hugo Chavez is a complete incompetent person. Top of the fact that he's a strong man, he's incompetent. I mean, this does not know what he's doing. And the result is this very wealthy country with a highly educated population being led by someone who, quite frankly, isn't qualified to lead anything, much less a nation of the stature of Venezuela. The second thing is failed economic policies. Venezuela today suffers from shortages across the board. For example, there's a shortages of medicine and medical equipment, which means, and this is not an exaggeration, people are literally dying because their doctors cannot prescribe drugs that aren't available. And the hospitals and the clinics don't have the equipment needed to conduct surgeries. So you speak to medical professionals in Venezuela, they will tell you that there are simple medications that could save the life of an individual. They can't do anything about it. I had someone tell me today, they asked the doctor, what do you do when one of your patients is about to die? And they say, nothing. We comfort them as they die. We don't have basic medicines to deliver them. And unlike the case of Cuba, by the way, where they're always saying it's because of the embargo the United States has, which of course is ridiculous, another topic for another day, there is no embargo on Venezuela. There is no sanctions on Venezuela and its people. And so as a result, there's no explanation for this. The supermarkets are bare. The shelves are completely bare. People there cannot buy food or even basics like toilet paper, toothpaste, toothbrushes, anything. In addition to the government's political censorship efforts, its economic policies also help censor in the sense that there are shortages of paper that independent newspapers need to print their editions. So here's another Machiavellian move that the government has made. There's a shortage of paper, and they make sure that the independent press has no access to paper. Well, if you don't have paper, you can't print a newspaper. Things are so bad in Venezuela today that The Economist earlier this month compared Venezuela to Mugabe's Zimbabwe 15 years ago. And the reason why that is an unbelievable comparison is because, as I said earlier, Venezuela has one of the largest, if not the largest, oil reserves in the world. They have a highly educated population. They have a well-established business class of professionals. And their economy last year shrank by 5.7%. And this year it will sink by another 8%. This is a country that now has rolling blackouts, an energy-rich country that has rolling blackouts. In fact, it's gotten so bad that today their so-called president, the incompetent Nicolás Maduro, announced that government employees are only going to work 2 days a week, Mondays and Tuesdays. Government offices will now only be open 2 days a week because they don't want them turning on the lights. This is the state of one of the richest countries in the world and one of the richest countries in our hemisphere. And then you have a total societal breakdown. Economic misery begets desperation, and you're seeing that reflected in the lawlessness that plagues Venezuela. Crime rates are among the highest in the hemisphere, particularly the murder rate. But it stems from the top at the highest levels of leadership. When you have an incompetent thug running a country, someone whose government intimidates opponents by using what they call colectivos, which are nothing more than street gangs, to ride around in motorcycles causing all kinds of mayhem, shooting people and attacking people, it only contributes to the lawlessness. Do you know that Caracas, Venezuela, a beautiful city, is one of the most dangerous places in the world, comparable with war zones in terms of the murder rate? It's basically every man and woman for him or herself in Venezuela. Then you have atrocious human rights abuses. Since the Venezuelan government crackdown on demonstrators and political opponents began in February of 2014, dozens of innocents have been killed, thousands have been beaten and targeted for intimidation, hundreds have been jailed, including Leopoldo Lopez, who has been a political prisoner now for more than 2 years. We need to demand the release of 115 political prisoners in Venezuela and respect their rights and those of their families. I heard another horrifying story today. Some of these political prisoners, most of them are men, when their wives go visit them in prison, those wives are strip searched by male guards as an ultimate act of humiliating them. This is the situation in Venezuela. And last but not least, we have a de facto political coup by the Maduro regime. This country faces a real political and constitutional crisis. Maduro, for example, has stacked the country's Supreme Court with his loyalists. And the Supreme Court is basically nullifying every law that the Congress there passes. The opposition won the election in the last cycle. By the way, they won because the discontent with the government is so massive that they couldn't steal the election. It was so big that not even they could steal the election from them. So they sat this new Congress. He has stacked the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is literally nullifying law after law. In fact, doing it not for judicial reasons, but for blatantly political ones. You have, they're also using them, and Maduro basically ignores the law. The congressional branch there will pass a law with a veto-proof majority. He just ignores it. Imagine passing a law out of the House, out of the Senate, sending it to the president. He can't veto it, and he just ignores it, refuses to do it. This is the situation in our own hemisphere. And the result here is an incredible disaster. Of deep interest to us, by the way, because of all the uncertainty it's causing in the region. So what can we do about it? Well, first of all, it's in our national interest. The current situation is happening in our own hemisphere. It threatens to destabilize the region. It creates more pressure on our neighbors and our strategic allies like Colombia, where Venezuelans have been fleeing to. This creates migratory pressures on the United States. And the lawlessness is fueling organized crime, including drug cartels, which senior government officials in Venezuela have established links to, which impacts our entire region. For these reasons and more, the United States has a national interest in making sure Venezuela does not spiral even further out of control. The first thing we should do is we should be active at the Organization of American States as it considers the situation in Venezuela, and they should be asked that the voting members recognize the humanitarian and political crisis in Venezuela. The United States should ask our allies in the region, countries that receive an extensive amount of aid from this country, Haiti, Colombia, the Central American nations, our neighbors up north in Canada, among others, to support this effort. Some of these countries, not Canada, but right now we are about to give hundreds of millions of dollars to these countries in Central America, in the Northern Triangle, the Alliance for Prosperity. I think that's a good idea. But we should ask them to support what we're trying to do, what I hope we'll try to do at the OAS. The same with Haiti. We have poured millions of dollars into Haiti's reconstruction. We should use that as leverage to ask them to support something happening at the OAS. What's happened in Venezuela is nothing short of a coup d'etat, a de facto coup. And the Organization of American States, if it has any reason to exist anymore, it should be to defend democracy in the region. It is the reason why we have an Organization of American States. We will soon find out whether that organization is even worth continuing to exist if it cannot pronounce itself collectively on the outright violation of democracy in a nation that purports to be a democratic republic. Sanctions. We have imposed sanctions on human rights violators, not sanctions on the people of Venezuela, not sanctions on the government, on human rights violators, many of whom steal money from the Venezuelan people and invest it in the United States. Just yesterday, in the front page of the Miami Herald, a story that one of the individuals linked to the petroleum industry with the government in Venezuela, a billionaire, and you become a millionaire with these links by basically stealing the money, is the secret developer behind a major development in Miami, Florida, in my hometown, in my home state. You travel to Florida, you come down there, you let me know, any of my colleagues, and I will show you where these people live, and I will show you the money they have stolen from the Venezuelan people, and are living the high life on weekends in Miami. You see them everywhere. And that's why we impose sanctions on them. There will be an effort here, I hope, in the next day or so to extend those sanctions for another 3 years. And finally, I hope the United States uses our megaphone to highlight the corruption in the institutions of government in Venezuela. And now that should not be tolerated. There's also a humanitarian component to this. We should help make sure the Venezuelan government is not stealing or otherwise standing in the way of the Venezuelan people getting the medicines and food that they need. For far too long, the issues in this hemisphere have been ignored by administrations in both parties, by this administration. We can no longer ignore this, and I hope we give Venezuela and the Western Hemisphere the attention and the priority that it merits. It is in our national interest to do so.